would like to bring in the woman of the hour, the one and only Scottie Nell Hughes. Okay, my voice went up. I'm sorry about that. Scottie Nell Hughes, a journalist, news anchor, and political commentator. Scottie, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning?
I am doing good, but every time that I think we take 2 steps forward into finding peace in this world, a bomb goes off, literally. And last night, waking up to the news of the head, I guess, is of one of the nuclear programs there in Russia being killed is not a good step or a good look. But I have to tell you, last night when I got the initial reports that a bomb or an explosion had happened in Moscow, it literally made my heart stop because that's how close we are. One bad move could cause our entire world to explode, literally. And I think that is why every day you just it's an ongoing. I think they say there's a season of joy right now for those who are paying attention to what's going on in the world now that we've added Syria into the mix. I think those that are paying attention are also very apprehensive and are very have a lot of anxiety right now. As to it seems like we're at an all-time high of a boiling pot that we're trying to keep from flowing over.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. In fact, Donald Trump mentioned something like this at his speech also when he was taking questions. I want you to hear what he says about Joe Biden on the Ukraine front. Because, a lot of people had said, okay, well, Donald Trump said he wants to bring hostilities down, but Donald Trump has been pretty much vacant on this issue of Joe Biden continuously escalating. I mean, if you remember, Joe Biden allowed the decision for Ukraine to fire into Kursk specifically. And then I think it was last week where there were multiple attack items that were not in Kursk. They were in a different part of Russia. And nobody had anything to say about it. It was just kind of like a whistling past the graveyard without necessarily referencing the fact that they've escalated once again. Trump, when asked about this, said this. I'm going to take this back to the beginning.
More difficult is going to be the Russia-Ukraine situation. I see that as more difficult. I don't think they should have allowed missiles to be shot 200 miles into Russia. I think that was a bad thing. And that brought the Koreans in, North Korea, another man I get along with very well. I'm the only one that does. But that did a lot of bad things. I don't think that should have been allowed. Not when there's a possibility, and certainly not just weeks before I take over. Why would they do that without asking me what I thought? I wouldn't have had them do that. I think that was a big mistake they made. Actually, more difficult is going to be the Russia.
Yeah, he's right. I mean, Joe Biden is doing all of this stuff after losing an election. Meaning, if you think about around the world for the moment, you get Macron, who keeps losing elections. He can't win an election to save his life. And then had this kind of mini coup where he put in Barnier in position and then turns around, and when Barnier fails after 3 months, he puts in somebody else. You get Keir Starmer, who's massively hated. I mean, he is deeply underwater in regards to the number of people who despise him as opposed to his public support. You get Schultz, that government has just collapsed. You get Trudeau, who's on suicide watch in regards to whether or not his government is going to resign. These people are pushing and agitating for escalation, despite the fact that they are radically and massively unpopular, being led by Joe Biden, a man that was so out of his mind, he couldn't even run in the election. His own party ate him alive, so he couldn't run in the election. This is pretty astonishing. Trump has a point in this, right? Like, how are you doing this when I'm supposed to take power in a few weeks, and you're effectively making it more difficult for me to do my job that the American people chose for me to do? Give me your thoughts, Scottie.
So there's several layers to this onion to unpack. Let's start with the first layer going, do we really think Joe Biden, who doesn't even know what day it is, what time it is, and I don't think they're true, but you hear the rumors that he's basically in a coma. He's only got a year to live. Do you really think he's making these decisions right now? If you do, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you for $5. So the question is, who's the group, who's the cabal that's calling these orders, making these orders happen, and basically giving the green light to these final structures in the last few weeks of power to cause as much chaos, as much turmoil as they can. And just like I think with the UFOs that are flying around our cities right now, what are they really trying to distract us from? And I think that, what are they trying to distract the media? We're definitely in a bait and carrot stick right now. of going, what are they doing? And I think what they're doing is they say cleaning up, they're hiding, they're shredding, they're doing everything to any mess that they've created around the world. They're taking this time to shred all the paper, shred any paper trail, totally just dissolve anything that if discovered could really damage. Not like their credibility is not already damaged enough, but really show what's been going on the last 4 years. They do not want a paper trail for what their foreign policy has really produced, because it'll lead right back to their bank accounts right now. So I think that's why you're seeing this chaos happen. I think everybody at this stage understands. I mean, besides the fake report coming out from CNN where they rescued actually, I think that was probably the most authentic movement of foreign policy of the United States and the press in the last, week, was them releasing the fact that they admitted that the person that they supposedly rescued with his well-manicured hands was a known terrorist and a known abuser and a known person that had killed Americans. Like, way to go, CNN. We're in international journalism. We know it's not hard to fact check. I get it that you're in a war zone, but it's pretty simple to notice. It's kind of like when you notice someone, driving up to Goodwill and they're driving a brand new Corvette or Mercedes and they're wearing a Louis Vuitton and Gucci, but they're asking for food stamps. You notice something's not adding up right, okay? And I think that's, what that shows what our foreign policy has just become, one of those just big ruse of what is actually going on. So what we're seeing in all of these areas, and Trump is right. Right now, they're trying to create as much chaos on the surface because underneath they are destroying, they're shredding, they're getting rid of all evidence of all of the horrible things that they've done the last 4 years to basically pad them and their buddies and their cronies' pockets with taxpayer dollars in the United States. And I think ultimately you just follow the dollar trail and it'll lead right back to some American bank accounts and some investor bank accounts in the EU that have that literally profit off of chaos. What is Trump going to do about it? That's the best question. What we're finding right now in the Trump world is there's two factions. You have the Tulsi Gabbard faction, the ones that, and I think JD Vance really does fall into that, the ones who have seen what war looks like, do not believe in American interventionism, who wants to bring everything back home, versus the folks who have profited off of war. There is a string of those that I've found in the appointments that for some reason might they find ways for them and their buddies, just like what exists right now. So you've got two lines of thoughts. The question is, who gets to see Donald Trump before he goes in and makes a decision or makes a press conference? Well, like yesterday, thank goodness it was the ones that actually had common sense. Republican or Democrat, I think he is surrounding himself with people from both parties who are like-minded and like ideologies when it comes to foreign policy. Those folks, oddly enough, the majority of them are Democrats. Former Democrats. But you've got the RFKs, the Tulsi Gabbards, to a certain extent, Tucker Carlson's in that crowd. Those that are saying, stop, you need to look into this. And I think that's right now what Donald Trump is doing. And I am praying that we can get to January 20th without a nuclear missile going off somewhere in this world, because they continue to escalate. Like I said, we're just one headline away from our entire world erupting in fire.
No, I agree with you on this. The Clarissa War thing was just radically humiliating. It's astonishing. Look, I get lying, right? And I get propaganda. I get that. This is just making stuff up. And it's not even done well. I mean, at one point, the guard shoots. I mean, for one, it's been a week since they've emptied the jails. So all of the jails were emptied already. Guard comes in, shoots the lock, and just so happens finds somebody who's laying under a blanket, who didn't move when the lock was shot, despite the fact that a gun just went off supposedly within a few feet of his head. And he's surprised. Oh. And like you said, manicured hands, new jacket or clean jacket. He's chubby and overweight, so it wasn't like he was emaciated as he was in the cage for all of that time. Like, it's just one failure after the next. You've been on CNN. You were there doing, I believe, the Trump election at one point. Not the last one, but the one before last. I mean, I often wonder to myself, are they lying or are they just getting it wrong? Which one is it? You've seen behind the veil of this network. Which one is more likely to be true in this? Did Clarissa Ward just make that up, stage that? Or did she walk into the staging of that? I mean, she's been caught lying before in other stories, but this is absurd. Like, this is on another level.
Well, let me say this. My last appearance on CNN was right after RT was shut down in 2021, 22, whenever that was.
Oh,
and I got nailed. How dare you work for Russian propaganda? How dare you actually push false stories, false narratives? And I'm sitting there going, are you kidding me? Have you looked at some of your stories? Have you looked what you've been caught with? And now you have this. This wasn't the first time they've staged a breaking news story or some sort of rescue. There's multiple examples of it. Once again, for so long, the mainstream media, people like CNN, have been the only shop in town. And so they could get away with staging these stories. And it makes you really start to doubt everything you watched growing up, what was real, what was not. And citizen journalists, those who have a phone, has really screwed them over, because now they actually are being held accountable and people are seeing behind the scenes of what really happened. I think it's a mix of both. I think there's some laziness in the industry, because you could probably find, if you really wanted to find a Syrian prisoner who had suffered, it's probably not too hard to find. But to stage it to that extent, that dramatic, you had the questions were going to come. They were going to come, obviously, from the moment it was. But here's where I think that the biggest problem that we have with this, and it's about talking about how moving forward. I mean, we had this week, not to go down a rabbit hole, we had ABC, a judge actually ruled in Trump's favor, making ABC pay Donald Trump and his campaign $15 million. It wasn't the dollars, because that's just the top of the iceberg for the legal fees probably Trump has had to pay. But it's the apology. It's that George Stephanopoulos and ABC had to apologize to Donald Trump. That right there is changing the bar. I do believe we are going to see a new world of change, both in how the press treats Donald Trump and how Donald Trump treats the press. He is going to start going after all of those and that's the only way to hold them accountable for what they're doing, is to legally, unfortunately, have to enroll yourself into battles. In fact, there could be a whole legal team set up to handle everybody that has misquoted, slandered everything to Donald Trump over the last 8 years. But I do believe it's just going to be like a snowball that starts rolling. That case, CNN being exposed, you're going to continue to see these folks start holding themselves accountable in the newsroom. The question is, and this is where you and I become the prisoners of freedom of speech. Will freedom of speech and freedom of the press be re-released into the United States? Will we be able to actually be able to talk again and actually, be able to feed our families and keep our electricity going? Because right now, you and I are literally prisoners of our own Constitution right now. And I think that if people understood why, what has happened behind channels, backgrounds, what this DOJ, what our Treasury has done to American citizens, they would be absolutely appalled. And you would realize that our country is in dire straits when it comes to actually protecting our freedoms, our bills. And as long as we continue to expose CNN and judges rule in the right, we might have a chance to save this country and reverse a lot of these horrible things that's been done to us.
The wild part about it is you get people like Joy-Ann Reid or Rachel Maddow, who has been lying on air for the last 8 years or 5 years or whatever, however, going all the way back to 2016 and before. And yet they fail upwards. Joy-Ann Reid still has a job. Rachel Maddow still has a job. For all intents and purposes, these guys are propaganda outlet or state media. The moment that a Democrat is in office, they are going to back the Democratic position through and through, every bit as much as Fox would back the Republican position through and through. I have a hard time seeing how this is different from state media, including just lying on behalf of the administration in this case. So I feel you on that. Do you think that, let me ask you this, why do you think that the censorship thing has become such a mainstay now?
Because we are in a different era. We actually have a president that's going to support it, as opposed to other Republican presidents who in the past have who have benefited from a dishonest media. This president does not. This president has been his target. In fact, the media has tried to make their whole image about throwing this president into a negative light. And so that's the difference between this one and in the past of a George W. Bush or George H. Bush or even a Ronald Reagan. Now, President Reagan did call out the media, but nowhere to the extent did they target him like what we've seen them be literally a PR wing of Trump's opposition, and add into that a mobilized departments within our government that have also used their powers and their connections to hurt Donald Trump. I think it's going to be very interesting as long as Trump is able to stay on task, stay on path, and to listen to the Tulsi Gabbards of the world. And I'm going to keep my names out until they're actually confirmed, and not some of the other ones that are around him that don't have his best interest. That I do believe, just like in 2016, there were plants in there that were meant to sabotage Trump's agenda, to distract him, to get him tied up so that he could not continue on the path that he is. Yesterday's press conference, I was asked last night, he seemed very reserved, very much a different mantra. Actually pretty open, pretty informative, took questions, something we've not seen Joe Biden do in a long time. And I think that as long as we continue on progress, and I hate that word to a certain extent, but moving forward, stepping together, you're going to see a more transparent president this time. When they start to become very adversarial, and I'm not saying that's not going to happen. There are going to be some final, final moments of dramatics here in the United States when his policies start coming out. The question is, what extent will the media go to try to make him look bad, to make him look like he's not doing his job right? He's got some very aggressive policies from day one. And depending on if they try to do the same sort of staging that they did yesterday, in the halls of the jails of Syria, will we see some more of those dramatics in those last stands? And will he have the right defense to be able to fight back this time?
Yeah, he seems different. How can I explain this? The first time around, he couldn't get the people that he wanted. It was slim pickings. He was taking control of the Republican Party. He didn't necessarily control it. He was stuck with the Trump and Russia stuff. He was under a massive amount of pressure the last time he was in office and he took power. It feels different now. He seemed more confident. It seems like he's broken the back of the opposition, meaning the people who were going after him for the lawsuits, okay, those have been disbanded. The people who were going with the Trump and Russia, Trump is Hitler, Trump is a fascist, those people have somewhat backed away saying, okay, maybe he's not as bad as we thought he was going to be. It's that stuff that has seemed to go in with him being far more centered in himself going into this particular term. I want to play this clip where he talks about China because he takes on a very different tact than we are accustomed to. He's invited Xi Jinping. And the first time when I heard this, I was like, okay, well, Donald Trump is acting like Xi Jinping is going to kiss the ring. That's not going to happen. They don't see us as, they're not inferior. They see us as equals. And that's always going to be an issue, right? If I see you as an equal and you see me as lesser than, then we're never going to get along because you're not going to accept me in the same terms to which I accept you. But Trump said this, and he actually sounded sincere when he said this, and this sounded very different than he, at least to me, than he typically sounds. I want to get your take on this.
Are you disappointed that China's Xi won't be at the inauguration?
I don't know that he won't be at the inauguration. I mean, I haven't really spoken to him about it. I don't know that, actually. I would say that if he'd like to come, I'd love to have him. But there's been nothing much discussed. I have had discussions with him, letters, et cetera, at a very high level. We had a very good relationship until COVID. COVID didn't end the relationship, but it was a bridge too far for me. But if he'd like to come, I'd certainly be. He hasn't, just so you understand, he hasn't said one way or the other. Because a lot of people say he won't come, he will come. People think he will come, he won't come. It's something we barely discussed, just about didn't discuss. But I have had, especially through letters, some very good conversations.
Have you had conversations with Venezuela?
Because China and the United States can together solve all of the problems of the world, if you think about it. So it's very important. And, he was a friend of mine. I mean, he was here for a long time, right in that spot, except sitting in a very comfortable chair. He wasn't standing like you are. But we spent hours and hours talking. And, he's an amazing guy.
Have you spoken to Venezuela?
The press hates when I say that, but he's an amazing person.
What the hell is that?
I think that's excellent.
If I read that out to somebody, they would have never believed that came from Trump. That's astonishing. And I can't tell if this is okay, BRICS is going to be an issue. We need to deal with the fact that the dollar is being whittled away as a reserve currency. These other countries have gotten to the point of trying to exclude us from a lot of the trade. So we need to pull somebody out of that. And if we can pull China out of that mix and get closer to them, then maybe we can pull them away from Russia. I don't know what this is short of that, if he's being earnest, because he seemed earnest in that. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think he's absolutely earnest. He realizes that we are not going to, at this point, we are not going to bring peace to this world. We're not going to bring economic prosperity to the United States or any country if we continue this very aggressive talk and definitely don't back it up with our actions. I think that Donald Trump looks at these leaders, and while they've been demonized, because we have to always have a villain in our story here in America, we always have to have a villain that we go after. He's looking and say, you know what? I might not agree with everything you're doing for your country, but why are we going to war over it? Why am I going to make my people suffer because of what you're doing to your people? Let's figure out how to make this work. Remember, Donald Trump is a businessman. He has done business in China before, so he's seen it from all various levels. Donald Trump at least will admit that the United States is not perfect, and there are things he needs to fix. But here's what he's going to have to do from day one. And it's whether you're talking about Xi Jinping, I think it would be absolutely, you would have talked about the press's heads melting down. But I think on that front row, and it's sitting when it comes to his inauguration, I want to see all the typical world leaders, the UK, whoever they have in power at that point, whoever Canada has as their leader right now. It could be a whole mix. I want the leaders of every country, but I also want to see that Xi Jinping. I want to see Zelensky. I want to see Vladimir Putin. And I want from that podium for Donald Trump to say that a peace agreement has come to terms and both leaders have signed it. And starting from this day forward, that we will be dealing with peace in the land. I don't think we're going to see out of Israel and Iran. That one I don't think is going to tell you there's a hell of a chance of that happening. But I think in order for Trump to not be completely entangled like he was the first time, he is going to have to, from day one, establish that this is going to be moving forward. He will not allow himself to be embroiled. If he allows that fight to continue, the Russia-Ukraine to continue into his administration, they're going to use it to be the rope around his neck again. So he is going to have to come out of the gate almost immediately with a peace deal brokered between those two leaders of Russia and Ukraine, or else they will continue to use it to demonize him. His own political enemies here in the United States will use it to weaken him every day that he does not get a peace deal done between the two countries.
Yeah, well, apparently Zelensky has not been invited to the U.S., which I don't blame him. Every time you see him, he's begging for money. I always call him an international panhandler. Xi Jinping, though, was a very interesting invite. And, Putin or any of these guys, I would imagine, would be an interesting invite. Kim Jong-un, all of them. Like you said, their heads would explode in that situation. Yeah, it's fascinating. From your point of view, on the domestic side, what is Trump going to have to do when he gets in office? Like his first 100 days?
First 100 days. Well, you're already seeing him saying that he's going to destroy the Department of Education at the federal level and return that power back to the states.
Unfortunately, yes.
Very easier said than done. That is truly a major bureaucracy that he's going to have to break. But I think that's going to be one of his biggest focus. Obviously, the securing the border, this deportations, it's definitely the hot button issue that the majority of the mainstream media is focusing on for good reason. There is a really good chance that something's going to go wrong with these deportations. You're going to have let me just call it for what it is. You're going to have, unfortunately, whether it's done on purpose by someone to sabotage or not, you are going to have videos of a child being pulled from their parents' hands at some point. Yeah. You're going to have dramatic footage. It's going to happen. The question is, you can't, unless Donald Trump himself is knocking on the doors and escorting the families into the vans, there's going to be something that's going to really go bad about this. Is going to be used once again by his own political enemies here at home to continue to distract and weaken what he's overall trying to accomplish. So I think between education, immigration, I think those are the two things. The other side of it is inflation is continuing to rise. And you're seeing, highest inflation of a holiday season in a long time. that there is. And so those folks are going to get those credit card bills about the same time that Donald Trump is sworn into office. And he is going to have to handle economically out of the gate, or else people will already start to figure out that he's probably more of a politician, and he doesn't need that image going out. So he's going to have to figure out some way to alleviate the pain of opening those envelopes that people have had to charge their cards this holiday season just to get through.
I guess the question is, how does he do that, though? I mean, between the campaigns, Donald Trump, by the way, I hope the Department of Education doesn't factor into this. I totally disagree with him going after that. Look, I'm not going to agree with everything Trump does, right? I didn't vote for him. But as I said before, kind of like John Wayne, he's my president. I hope he does well. And I hope he attends to his campaign pledges, especially around this notion of war and peace, less so among other things. So there are things that I actually want him to do well on, because there was a slight difference between Trump and some of the other candidates in the way that he was kind of running that race and the way that people viewed him, especially from the standpoint of the working class. One of the things that Donald Trump did talk about during the election campaign that the Democrats completely ignored, which is pretty astonishing, was BRICS. Now, he brought it up in the sense of, okay, well, sanctions are a problem. It's undercutting the dollar, meaning our sanctions are undercutting the usage of the dollar around the globe, because at that point you made the dollar expensive. You made it a speculative device because you're using it as a weapon. Okay, that's a problem. All of these other countries are organizing around us in regards to BRICS and are trying to do trade without using the dollar as a medium of exchange. And we need to do something about that. And that's when he brought in this tariff stuff, which it's not going to go anywhere. In fact, that policy is going to make it that much faster where those countries try to get rid of the dollar. This, you're with us or you're against us stuff is kind of the stuff that has brought us to the area where we are now. So assuming for the moment that is not the way he goes about it, because somebody whispers in his ear, sir, this was a bad idea. We're going to hasten the speed of this thing, which is why part of me thinks that the call for China, for Xi Jinping, has a lot to do with that. Initially, they used to have this policy where you either get close to Russia or China and play one against the other in order to prevent the two from merging and coming together and working together. Now, China and Russia would say at this point, well, we're closer than allies. But that doesn't necessarily stop Trump from trying to make inroads with one of the two parties, or if not both parties, especially if he's talking about a deal between Russia and Ukraine, basically try to end that war, but also working with Xi Jinping for whatever he's trying to work with them on. Do you think he's going to be able to do anything about that in real terms, though? This idea of the world moving away from the U.S. because of the way the U.S. has used the dollar as a weapon in the way we use sanctions. Do you think he's going to be able to somehow make amends for that, if that makes sense, to bring trust into the usage of the dollar or for the as a partner for the U.S.? I hope that makes sense. That was very long-winded.
No, and I don't know if we're not too far down that yellow brick road that we could bring it back to the dollar. Unfortunately, The last 4 years of Biden's foreign policy decisions have also hurt economically the U.S.'s economic decisions. So I don't know how far down the road it is. And by pairing China versus Russia, Russia versus China, that you can't use that same tactics that he used years ago. It's a different world we're living in. Those two have been united. The cards have been called, and most presidents will look of other countries will go, wait a minute, Trump, you're only in for 4 more years. Can't guarantee that you're going to have a successor. So we're not going to totally blow up our friendship, because as we've seen, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are going to last longer in leadership than Donald Trump is. And so they're not going to blow up, and they've been in longer, so they're not going to blow up their relationship, their friendship, seeing how the United States has turned into a weapon and used their economics as a weapon over the past few years. The damage that these sanctions have done to other countries, but also here at home, is going to be hard to be repaired even by a single president. So I think what you're going to have to do, instead of sitting here and fighting a tariff, you're right, is not going to work. Trump's going to learn that very quickly. He's going to have to figure out a way to make peace with these countries in order to have them there so that we can have economic restoration. I love that Trump said, you bring $1 billion into our economy and I'll meet with you. I'll talk to you. I think that's the way to go at this stage. You want to fight inflation? You want to fight BRICS? That's what you do. Incentivize these companies into coming into the United States and doing business over here, unlike what the last foreign policy was, making American dollars go work in other countries, number one, or number two, making an adversarial relationship with those countries that could be economically beneficial to the U.S. If not, at the very least, bring peace to the world.
You know, it shocked me, a speech, but I got to be honest, Republicans have been saying stuff that has been shocking me in regards to this kind of polarity shift. And I don't mean Republicans as a whole, because you say the Lindsey Grahams of the world, the Mitt Romneys of the world, you know, these kind of crocodiles. But I remember when J.D. Vance was on the campaign trail, he's in a debate with Tim Walz, I'm sorry. And Tim Walz is attacking him for being willing to meet with Kim Jong-un and some of the other people around the globe. And he turns to him and he says, you know, compromise is not a dirty word. Now, that is astonishing. It's true, for one, but it's astonishing that a Republican had to tell a Democrat that compromise is not a dirty word. I also heard J.D. Vance in Congress make this speech about the way that China engages the world versus the way we engage the world, and why the global South has started to aggregate around China. And his point was, they build schools, hospitals, roads, bridges, and we build military bases. And, you know, they don't moralize about the way those countries function, meaning their country is their country is their country. They just are there to do business, and maybe the U.S. need to have something of a similar status to it. Again, that is an amazing thing coming from a Republican. And that is different than what I grew up with Republicans being. Why the polarity shift? And maybe that's the wrong word for it, but I'll go with that. Why do you think? I mean, you've been in the Republican Party for a while. How has that, if you had to define Trumpism versus standard Republican methodology, what would it be? Is there really a big difference between those things? And if so, what would that difference be more than, what would that difference be? Is it foreign policy being one of the main differences?
You hit the nail on the head on this one. And this is where the conversation that's happening. You are seeing a shift. You're either going to see the emergence of a third party that will eventually overtake the second party, greatly weakening the Democrats and the Republicans, that third party, or you're going to see a shift in what it means to be a Republican. The John McCain's, Lindsey Graham's, Mitt Romney are finally heading out to the pasture, or going under the pasture, depending on where they are. We are here in the Republican Party. We are no longer the party. I do believe you still have some that are holding on dearly for life. But I do see there is a shift happening in the GOP brand, at least superficially right now, where you have folks, I've always said, that there is a rebellion. I'd like to think it's my generation. I think it's those that are in the 40s, young 50s, 30s. There is a rebellion against our parents happening within our party. Our parents screwed up the Republican Party. We lost 2 elections because we put 2 absolutely screwed up folks at the top of our ticket, and we lost down ballot. And so this is the reclaiming by those who have had to live and suffer by the Republican policies of George H. Bush, George W. Bush. We've had to suffer, and this is our rebellion against our own party, is actually making it be one of more common sense, one that is not going to isolate, and realize that our party has screwed this country over just as much as the Democrats have. So the Democrats have some good ideas, especially when it comes to healthcare, to prescription drug prices, to a lot of things. As long as we can keep the social, and I hate to use this can word, wokeness out, and right now focus on the policies, the agenda of getting this country back on the right track, we can deal with the details of the personal issues, the emotional issues after we get our country. But guess what? I don't care if you're black, brown, white, yellow, gray, any color, male, female, what religion you are. If we don't have a country where we can provide for our families on, and that where we feel safe walking down the street, it doesn't matter how you emotionally feel, you're going to be stuck in your house and isolated by yourself, like what we found ourselves in 2020. And I think that's why you're seeing this revolution happen within the Republican Party. And I hope it continues and doesn't get struck down, because sometimes you do lose heart in this fight. You lose battles. We don't have the Andrew Breitbarts of the world continuing. We have Tucker Carlson. We don't have Rush Limbaugh anymore. We have a Matt Walsh. We have a Joe Posobiec. We have, a Glenn Greenwald, who isn't even a Republican, But now all of a sudden people are embracing him because they understand his foreign policy has been truth all along. That's what I love. We're finally becoming open-minded, that we just don't identify you based on the Republican brand by your name.
Yeah. I think Glenn transcends the party space.
Now,
I mean, like,
he didn't. 5 years ago, he did not. He was definitely on the other side. Nobody would listen to him.
But see, I don't think he changed. Like, that's what I mean. Like, I would say I didn't change. I would say the Democratic Party just left me. And I think Glenn would probably say the same thing. Like, I didn't move. The party just left. Like, meaning the moment that you try to be, like I always say, I'm sitting on the moon looking at events. And without friend or favor, just kind of pointing out, okay, this is my thought on this. And I try to be consistent, which is why I say I'm sitting on the moon looking at events. I get the sense that Glenn is similar in this, where Glenn would hit Democrat intransigence every bit as much as Republican intransigence, and is willing to hit either. And I think you need those people in the space. And I agree with you also on this notion that there does seem to be a change. There seems to be this kind of, for one, there's a backlash against wokeness. So there's that. That backlash, I would argue, is deserved. And you're seeing that in people like on the left, on the hard left, like Anna Kasparian or Cenk Uygur, when they're complaining about trans surgeries and trans kids and all of this stuff, and how that stuff has been polluting the real political conversation, especially on the left. When really the left, look, as a lefty, what I want to have is an economic conversation about how do we put more money in people's pocket? How do we ensure people get health care? How do we ensure people get education? How do we liberate the large masses of the population? And I think you do that by ensuring that certain things are covered, like education and healthcare, at the very least, as a very minimum. I want everybody in this country to be able to A, get healthcare when they need it, or B, regardless of where they start, to be able to get even a doctorate if they want it. But that, from that point of view, though, that gets cross-pollinated with, well, what about trans kids? And from my point of view, okay, well, that has nothing to do with the economic stuff, but the Democratic Party has bought that stuff and fused it into the conversation. So for them, when they say progressive, what they're talking about is, oh, Kamala Harris is progressive because she's okay with trans surgeries in jails. And it's like, what? How the hell did that get cross-pollinated into that? And I think what you're seeing is a backlash against it. Even in certain corners of the left, they're realizing, okay, this is a fail. This doesn't work. We need to get back to some level of basics. Do you see that? Or am I getting that entirely wrong? Like, do you think I'm misperceiving that because of the area to which I'm perched in the political space? Or do you see this kind of backlash taking effect in the American public in general?
No, I think that's what you see. Neither side likes the extremist of their party and what the extremists of their party are pushing, because it's this very small percentage of what people in that party want to accomplish. And yet they're kind of like the barking dog getting the attention, and they're the biggest weapon against their own party. And so it takes your own party looking at those folks and saying, listen, I don't like that extreme rhetoric that you are pushing because it's damaging everything else we're trying to get accomplished. And that has been a realization that I think the Republican Party had to go through over the last, 4 years, but definitely over the last, 12 years. And now Democrats are having to do it to their own. Huh?
I remember the woman, she was like, I am not a witch. She started off.
That's the side of it. That's it. So it's that messaging. So I do think that there is a change happening on both sides. And I think that, like I said, if we go on and nothing against those that are older, I believe I love that generation. I think we have a lot to learn from them. But the ones that they put in power are probably the most despicable people on this earth. And I think it's time to just go on and let them grab their flannel shirts and their fishing poles and go out to the deserts or the fishing ponds. And let's let the next generation start stepping up, because it's our generation that's being affected by the decisions made by the older. And frankly, I think we got a lot of Joe Bidens that are in power. And I think it's time that they just go home.
Scottie Nell Hughes. She is a journalist, news anchor, political commentator, and a good friend of this show. Where can people find you, Scottie?
Well, Well, if these sanctions would get released, you'd find a lot more of me. But unfortunately, right now, you just have me on @ScottieNHughes on Twitter. I just started a Substack, so find Scottie Nell Hughes on Substack. Really excited about getting back to writing, and just generally on News Nation here domestically in the United States.
Do you think that Trump is going to do anything about the sanctions, especially if he defined the sanctions as being one of the things that's hurting the dollar?
You cannot end the Russian-Ukraine conflict without taking up some of those sanctions. We are hurting the America. I don't think, and this is what the biggest thing about those sanctions, guys, we are refusing money from the world, investing in the United States. You know, we sit here and we talk about we need economic prosperity. Those sanctions are not hurting the Russian economy. You know whose economy they're hurting? They're hurting the American economy because it's keeping the Russians from spending, giving the money here in the United States. Not control. Money isn't control over here, but spending over here. That's right there is hurting us. I think if you really are serious about getting the economy, you want to invest $1 billion in the United States, take those sanctions off, and I guarantee that $1 billion will be here in no time.
By the way, not to mention Europe is being decimated. I mean, like if you look at Germany, where Germany is being deindustrialized, I think Bloomberg recently came out saying the German economy is unraveling. And even part of the reason that the government collapsed had a lot to do with the way that they were appropriating money. For one, there's a budget shortfall, and they're trying to figure out, hey, I know we have a budget shortfall, but how do we send more money to Ukraine?
Right.
And the people are like, why are we doing this? Like, how is this going to help? I mean, look, I agree with you. I guess the question becomes, is it one of those things that Donald Trump is going to do? And I don't know.
Yes. I think he does.
Oh, yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
I think he lifts these sanctions from day one. And I'm really hoping that both sides, but especially the Russian government, that's a part of the negotiating technique. And everything that I'm seeing shows everything. Because once again, Donald Trump wants money flowing. So if he has a chance to bring money into the United States, he's going to make that a priority. And this is the best way to do it.
From your mouth to God's ears, Scottie,
Amen.
Thank you for this.
Thank
Really appreciate
you.
it. Always appreciate
Happy
having you.
holidays.
You too. Be safe. Merry Christmas, by the way.
Merry Christmas.